Justify, I'm not saying that he beat great horses, but what Triple Crown winner has, and that's another point to be made here. In the history of the Triple Crown races, there has been, you cannot name on one hand, and that's only 5 horses, you cannot name on one hand Hall of Fame caliber horses that ran against a Triple Crown winner in the same year that that horse swept the series. You can't name them. There's only 2 that you can undeniably consider Hall of Famers, and one may have a tiny question mark. One is Sham, running behind Secretariat. He was very, very good in the Derby and Preakness, running behind a legend of a legend, the best of the Triple Crown winners. But he wasn't so good in the Belmont Stakes when Secretariat blew his doors off on the backside. So we can say that Sham, in the minds of many, a lot of people believe if Secretariat hadn't been around, he would have won a Triple Crown. We can at least say for sure, based on his times, because he ran a sub 2-minute Derby and finishing second to Secretariat's sub 2-minute Derby. And he was also very fast in what ended up being, after the Maryland Racing Commission finally got it right, a record-breaking run in the Preakness, that Sham would have been a very, very strong Derby and Preakness winner going into the Belmont Stakes. Might not have even had to run that fast to win those 2 races going in. But the 1.5 miles is maybe a question mark. But there's no question that Sham was a fantastic horse, and he was certainly a star running against a superstar. And in the case of Alydar, going up against a firm, Alydar is the other one. He had pitched battles with the firm as a 2-year-old. They hooked up 6 times as 2-year-old. 2-year-olds went their separate ways. A firm won 4 of those 6 as a 2-year-old. They, of course, went 4 for 4 going into the Triple Crown, and then they got it on again and tied it on and duked it out in the Triple Crown, and we all know the story there. And so Alydar is the only horse to ever finish second in all 3 races, and also the only one to finish second to a Triple Crown winner in each of the 3 classics. And those are the only 2 horses. You could make a small argument for Run Dusty Run. He was second in the Derby and the Belmont and third in the Preakness behind Seattle Slew. But I think most people would agree that Run Dusty Run is not a surefire, signed, sealed, and delivered bet that in any other year he would have been winning these classics, maybe even had a chance for the Triple Crown. But that's the point that's being made here, is that you cannot name Hall of Fame horses that raced in the year of any of these Triple Crown winners of the 13 that exist right now. So that's a fact right there, that it's always been a perfect storm to win the Triple Crown. So for people to say, and the perfect storm is outstanding horse that can hold his form running against subpar competition, because you can't have a Touch Gold or Victory Gallop or a horse of that caliber or Empire Maker running up on you after winning the Derby and Preakness in the Belmont Stakes. As a matter of fact, there have been years in which the Triple Crown bids were being busted where the depth chart was not very, very deep. In the case of Victory Gallop stopping Real Quiet, and Easy Goer stopping Sunday Silence, when you get past those 2 horses, there really wasn't anything there, with the exception of 98 when Coronado's Quest, who probably should have been in the Triple Crown in 1998, came on and won 4 graded stakes in a row, beating Victory Gallop in the Haskell and in the Travers Stakes. But when you really look at that situation, it is very difficult when you have star horses in one crop, particularly like 2007 with Street Sense and Curlin and horses like that. And with Silver Charm, who was a great horse, but he was up against some real warriors in Free House and Captain Bodgett and Touch Gold and so forth. Captain Bodgett missed the Belmont, but Touch Gold, with all the trouble that he had in the Preakness, was able to redeem himself in the Belmont Stakes to thwart Silver Charm of a Triple Crown bid. You cannot have a Nashua and a Swaps like in 1955 running against each other and then have a scenario where maybe perhaps between the Preakness and the Belmont, there's a regression. There have been horses that didn't regress going into the Belmont Stakes that lost the Triple Crown because they were running against a top flight adversary. Now, Majestic Prince, probably not an exact the best example. He did do a little bit of regressing after beating Arts and Letters in the Derby and the Preakness, and then Arts and Letters, who was a great horse, stopped him from winning the Triple Crown in 1969. That's one of the things that you cannot have when going for the Triple Crown. And when you look at the history of Triple Crown winners, with the exception of Secretariat and Affirmed, you just don't have a lot of high-end quality, and that's what it takes to win the Triple Crown. So that's being used against Justify. My point being that a lot of people have said, well, Justify didn't beat anybody. As if American Pharaoh did, because he seemingly gets more respect than Justify. That's been another problem with Justify. He's suffering from the Seattle Slew syndrome. And what that is after Secretariat won the Triple Crown in such a groundbreaking, devastating, supersonic fashion in 1973, when Seattle Slew won it 4 years later, well, of course, his his performance is paled in comparison, but nonetheless a great horse in pulling off the Triple Crown as an undefeated Triple Crown champion. All Triple Crown winners have a unique stamp on their sweeping of that series, and Slew at the time, his claim to fame not only was winning that Triple Crown, but winning it as an undefeated horse, 9 for 9, after he crossed the finish line first under Jean Cruguet to win the Triple Crown. But he paled in comparison in the minds of the public to Secretariat, but he was still a marvelous Triple Crown champion. So that's what justifies going through with American Pharoah, and I'll break down before this calendar year is over with that I believe what Justify accomplished was as good or better than what American Pharoah did, because one of the things he did do, he won on 2 off tracks. In all the decades of the Triple Crown, we've never seen the Derby and the Preakness come up with off tracks. We've seen a Kentucky Derby with the muddy track, the Preakness lightning fast. We've seen a Kentucky Derby with a lightning fast surface, and in the Preakness come up with a sloppy surface, which is what Pharoah had in 2015. But never have we seen the first 2 events both come up with tremendously monsoonish like wet, sloppy racetracks that Justify had to endure. And keep in mind, for those of you who seemingly have quickly forgotten, he's an unraced 2-year-old running in these races. It's hard enough, no matter who you're competing against, to be competitive and viable in the Triple Crown. This horse not only broke the 136-year Apollo curse, 136 years since an unraced 2-year-old had won the Kentucky Derby. Numerous horses had tried and had failed, and Fusaichi Pegasus and Big Brown were probably the 2 closest ones to pull that off, because they only started one time as 2-year-olds, and then they went on to win derbies in 2000 and 2008 respectively. But the problem is that Justify right here is getting really the short end of the stick here. He's being castigated, castrated, and he's being crucified for not beating great horses. But he is not the only Triple Crown winner to have run against subpar competition. That is the pattern of the Triple Crown. That's the key to win it, the perfect storm. Great horse, subpar competition. You cannot have the kind of competition. And in actuality, Justify actually had a harder Preakness than about 7 or 8 of the Triple Crown winners in the history of the series. The times have ranged anywhere from the 158 to 201 range. And remember, the slowest of those times in the Preakness in those Triple Crown years was posted by Citation, who before Secretariat came along was considered to be the best horse to look through a bridle, but he coasted in the Preakness. It was what I call a Preakness public workout. That has been the key to more than half of the Triple Crown, 8 of them, where horses won in anemic, in incredibly snail's pace, slow times in the Preakness, because the competition wasn't there. There was no need for them to run any faster, because the key to winning the Triple Crown, or at least having a really good shot at it, is to conserve energy. And American Pharoah got the same scenario where there was no competition. And that's, and you can't condemn the horse for that. You get the hand that you're dealt with, and you deal with it the best you can. And we've seen many times horses come into the Belmont Stakes as overwhelming favorites, and whether they couldn't get the mile and a half, whether just someone came up and ran a monster race, one or the other, if not both, they weren't able to win the Triple Crown. So Justify is definitely getting the short end of the stick here. When he crossed the finish line first at the Belmont Stakes, that was it. The Horse of the Year debate is done with, and that's the way that it is. Another argument that's been made has been about 3-year-olds that running against older horses that Justify. He's being penalized for a number of things. He's being penalized for being retired. Some people don't like the connections, Windstar Farm and Bob Baffert. He's being penalized for that. He's also being penalized for, as I said before, being retired. And one of the things he's really being roasted for is that he didn't run against older horses. Well, here's a few facts that you might find interesting that might temper or eliminate or squash some of those, or fan out, or basically extinguish the flame that's been burning about him not running against older horses. Number one, Seattle Slew, after winning the Triple Crown in 1977, was unceremoniously brought out of the barn to run 3 weeks after he swept the Triple Crown out in California for a money grab in the 1 1/4 swap stakes. It was a decision that Billy Turner, his trainer, was adamantly against. He objected to it. The Taylors in the Hills, Mickey and Karen Taylor, and Jim and Sally Hill, the owners, wanted to go out there. They basically overrode Billy Turner. The horse, lost his first race in his life. finishing fourth to a horse he destroyed in the Preakness Stakes in J.O. Tobin, a horse he never should have lost to, mainly because he shouldn't have been running 3 weeks after winning the Triple Crown. The horse deserved better than that. I don't think anyone will argue that. He lost his first race in his career, finished fourth, and he was put away for the rest of the year. So he didn't even get the opportunity to run against older horses based on that scenario. And what was really, really backwards about all of this was that Billy Turner, even though he was right that Slew shouldn't have been running 3 weeks after winning the Triple Crown, he was fired, and Doug Peterson became the trainer of Seattle Slew for the rest of his career. But he didn't get a chance to run against older horses. He was still named Horse of the Year. The next year, Slew, as a 4-year-old, ran against the current Triple Crown winner, Affirmed. And Affirmed ran twice against older horses after winning 9 races in a row, which included the Triple Crown and the Travers Stakes. He was disqualified in that race when beating Alydar one more time. And Slew beat Affirmed pretty convincingly in the Marlboro Cup, the now defunct Marlboro Cup, which was created in the year of Secretariat back in 1973. And then Slew went on and beat Exceller in the Woodward, and then he and Affirmed hooked up again. Remember, the Marlboro was the first meeting between Triple Crown winners, and it was a big showdown, and Seattle Slew basically handed Affirmed his head. But he still ran reasonably well in finishing second in that Marlboro Cup. In the Jockey Club, the saddle slipped, and whether Affirmed, that was the reason why he didn't run so well, finished fifth that day in a race in which Seattle Slew and Exceller battled to the wire. Exceller trained by the late, great Charlie Whittingham, who was a great horse on both turf and dirt. An incredible battle. And if Seattle Slew had won that race, you could have made a mild and maybe even a strong argument that he could have unseated a Triple Crown winner because, once again, he was Seattle Slew and he had won the Triple Crown the year before. But he didn't quite have the resume. But again, when Affirmed beat Alydar in that battle, which they hooked up for a mile and ding-donged all the way down the stretch and basically battled like unwavering warriors, the Triple Crown, when he won the Triple Crown, the Horse of the Year was over with, no matter what the outcome of the fall races were. That may not be fair, but that's the way that it works, and people are trying to buck tradition for the wrong reason. Justify is a wonderful Triple Crown winner. He has sealed his fate. He has a unique Triple Crown resume. Number 1 being an unraced 2-year-old to win the Triple Crown. Number 2 being the second one to be undefeated. Undefeated Triple Crown winner with Seattle Slew. And third, being able to win on 2 off tracks, something that's never happened in the history of the Triple Crown. After starting his career, he won 4 Grade 1s in 112 days. Accelerate won 5 Grade 1s. And again, he beat 3-year-olds that I would agree weren't that great, but they were better on the first and third Saturday of May than they were on the first Saturday in June than they were on the first Saturday in November in that Breeders' Cup, where Accelerate faced 2 of Justify's opponents that he had beaten in the Triple Crown races in the Breeders' Cup Classic, along with 4 other 3-year-olds that apparently made no improvement. And that's what's been driving the narrative against Justify, that these 3-year-olds aren't good. He should not be penalized. While he's over at Coolmore hanging out with American Pharaoh, he can't, basically answer these questions and defend himself against all of these, all of this incriminating evidence in which he really isn't to blame for, like I said, the lackluster performances of his 3-year-old counterparts. And people are lumping in what happened after the Triple Crown and piling that on to the whole narrative of that the 3-year-olds that Justify beat weren't that good. Well, of course they weren't that good overall. No one's arguing that based on the Breeders' Cup Classic. But they were better in the earlier part of the year than they were at the later part of the year. And that's when Accelerate ran against them. When by the time he got to them in November, they were worse than they were earlier in the year. So why is Accelerate, the quality of his Breeders' Cup, at a higher level just because the Breeders' Cup is considered to be a better race than what Justify did in the Triple Crown? Keep in mind, you don't get 2 or 3 chances if you stay in training as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, which doesn't happen very often, but if you do, you get multiple opportunities if you're good enough to run in the Breeders' Cup Classic in the mile. You only get 1 shot in the Kentucky Derby, and Justify, as an unraced 2-year-old, took his shot, and he basically hit bullseye, and he won all 3 races.
Justify has won the Kentucky Derby! Justify! He won the Preakness! Not even the fog could stop him! He's just perfect! And now he's just immortal!
It is a very, very difficult thing to do, and if it wasn't, we'd have 30 or 40 Triple Crown winners, or we'd have double the Triple Crown winners that we have right now. So people are there's no question the Triple Crown has been over romanced over the years, and I think that's where some of this is where some of the pushback is coming from. But at the same time, now we're devaluing and we're diminishing the Triple Crown winner because there are certain people that just don't like this horse as much as American Pharoah. They don't think he's a Secretariat. But people are diminishing him, comparing him to Pharaoh, comparing him to other horses. And in actuality, Justify's Triple Crown really ranks very, very high. So I think that we have a fundamentally, what I call a misguided mass media of people out there, bloggers and even good journalists, top journalists that are overlooking the fact that really when you look at Justify's competition, it was a little more competitive, even though they weren't a great group in the spring and the early part of the summer. And by the time Accelerate got him, what was already a weak, set of opponents in his 4 Grade 1 wins going into the Breeders' Cup Classic didn't get any better in the Classic. It's just the fact that it's the Classic. People are elevating that race to a higher Grade 1 status than what it was, and it really wasn't that high of a Grade 1 race. It was really on the weekend. And again, Accelerate can't be, he could be excused. He can't be condemned for that. He got the hand that he was dealt, and I give him credit. He was able to win. You have to give a horse credit when they're able to win, especially when they don't have their best stuff. But I think that people just are not getting the fact that Justify winning the Triple Crown bears more significance. When he crossed the finish line first in the Belmont Stakes, he was Horse of the Year. No matter what happened after that is, like I said, deemed, it's academic or it's moot. And Justify winning the Triple Crown, it's academic as far as who Horse of the Year is. It would be a tragedy and a travesty and as they call it, a miscarriage of justice if he doesn't win Horse of the Year. I'm certainly going to only say one thing as far as when it comes to Horse of the Year, and his name is Justify. Well, I have only one thing to say when it comes to Horse of the Year for 2018. Justify, a 3-year-old colt by Scat Daddy out of the Ghost Zapper mare Stage Magic, trained by the ebullient Bob Baffert, ridden by fellow Hall of Famer Mike Smith for Windstar Farm, China Horse Club, and Starlight Racing. He won the Kentucky Derby by 2.5 lengths in 2:04.20, captured the Preakness by a half length in 155.93, and then ran into Racing Immortality by securing the Triple Crown in the Belmont Stakes, winning by 1 3/4 lengths in 228.18 to become the 13th Triple Crown winner in history, the 2nd Triple Crown champion, undefeated, joining Seattle Slew, and the 1st Triple Crown winner to sweep the series as an unraced 2-year-old. Your 2018 Horse of the Year should be Justify.
Coming to the wire, he's just awesome! Justify has won the Kentucky Derby! For the first time in 136 years, a horse who did not race as a 2-year-old has won the Kentucky Derby. Justify! He's unstoppable! He won the Preakness! Not even the fog could stop him! And 6 teams ago,